You know what they say? They say God made man, Samuel Colt made him equal.
Yeah, that's a fucking great statement.
He set out to make the impossible gun.
Absolutely nobody wanted it.
In Texas, this would be like the early 1800s, roundabouts there. Texas was part of Mexico, but it was Spain owned it.
Yeah.
So the Spanish gave out these like settlement claims to certain people, and the guy who was tasked to head this group of 300 people who were going to move in and settle Texas, or what's now Texas, was Moses Austin. Great name. And you may be thinking ahead the last name Austin and think about the towns in Texas.
Sure.
And you might think that maybe he would be the reason that the town was named Austin. Would that be where your mind goes?
Oh, probably. If the guy named
Wrong.
Austin. What?
No, wrong. It was named after his son, Stephen F. Austin. And so Moses, before he went to go there, he died. So his son, Stephen F. Austin, who now they have a college named the Lumberjacks, I believe, named after the guy.
Trendy March Madness pick.
Oh,
some years.
Every year.
Yeah, 14 seed.
Yeah, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that range. Moses was the guy who originally got the grant.
Okay.
The impresario grant. And then he died, and so then Stephen was, his son, was tasked to take over the role.
So where did they come from?
Like Tennessee, I think, or somewhere. But they were it was a Spanish settlement, so they had been granted, like they were going to move 300 families with them. But anyway, so Stephen took 300 families to Texas to settle it, but by the time he got to Texas, unbeknownst to him, the Mexicans had the Mexican Revolution, and so it was now Mexico. And so he did some, I don't know, conniving around or whatever, talking with people, rubbing elbows, shaking hands, greasing the palm maybe even, and he got to where they would respect the impresario claim is what it was called, but respect the claim because it's a new government now, so they were really in no position. They didn't have to respect that, but so they ended up doing it, and he settled the area. And so they had these 300 families, and the Indians who were roaming the land would have been like primarily the Comanches, were causing all sorts of trouble for these settlers because they would see them putting up. Have you seen the movie Horizon with Kevin Costner?
No.
The new one. There's a scene in it where they have the guys, they'll come out and survey the land, they'll put the stakes in the ground or whatever.
Yeah.
And so there's a scene where these Indians are like crouched behind a hill watching them and trying to figure out what they're doing. And I don't know, the surveyors ended up dead in the movie, but.
So they wanted to settle it enough that, they'd stick around despite that initial hostility from the Comanche.
Right.
Had to find a way to defend themselves.
Yeah.
Because I guess if you have 300 families that packed up and moved there.
Yeah.
Not just going to say, let's go back.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And from the Comanche perspective is these people were moving in and building stuff on their hunting ground, because they were a nomadic tribe, so they're moving around and just following the buffalo herd and things like that. They're not setting up permanent housing.
Yeah.
And so what they would have seen was just the antithesis of what they were, and so they didn't understand it really, and they didn't like it. They certainly didn't want people setting up permanent residence on their land.
Yeah, they had no concept of property ownership.
Right, exactly.
Plots of land.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing?
They were kind of interesting because if you really look back at the Comanches' history before the horse was introduced to North America, they were a people who were kind of lower on the totem pole, I guess, as far as ability to war and make war with the tribes in the North America. Like they were kind of a shorter people, and like not what you'd think of as typically the most athletic type, but they were just really good at this horse and understood the impact that the horse was going to have in the future.
Yeah.
And so they got good at breeding them. They got good at riding them and shooting off of them.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, you know, if you're on a horse and you're shooting off of a horse and moving around, you not even double, I mean, quadruple the amount of space that you can cover in a set amount of time or whatever, you know. So that's more or less what was happening, is they were just killing these people. And so they hired on, I forget the year, but it would have been like 1823 maybe, or somewhere in that range. They hired on the first band of Texas Rangers, and it was 13 guys to like go out and protect the settlers or the surveyors and stuff. Because some of the surveyors would get good at or would make a name for themselves, like fighting basically, or protecting these people. And so they got hired on by Stephen F. Austin to do that, and they were the first Texas Rangers. And they would just ride out. They wouldn't have, just a couple rations of stuff, but then basically like they weren't pitching tents. I guess they were just like throwing their saddle down and sleeping on their saddle, and probably not even lighting fires and things like that because of the smoke they'd get seen, you know. Yeah. So they were just kind of learned from the Indians and started to fight like that, but just a small group of guys. And from that is basically the origins of the Texas Rangers. So at that time, the Comanches who were living there, they were people who got very good at like horses, training horses and stuff, and they could shoot 3 arrows in a second and a half.
Wow.
Which is crazy. And there's some guy on YouTube who like shows how to do it, but they would keep them in their fingers and then just
wow. Yeah.
And they could like duck behind the horse and shoot them underneath the horse's neck while they're riding too. So the firearms that, even though they're shooting bow and arrows, which are not obviously as powerful as a rifle, the rifle only had one shot, or your pistol or whatever that these first Rangers would have had. They might have had 2 pistols and a rifle, so they have 3 shots, but they've got to shoot the one, get their other, shoot it, and then shoot it, and then they're having to reload everything. Whereas the Comanches could just boom, 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 you know. And so even though there was less firepower for a single shot, if you can get off 25 arrows in the time it takes for the guy to get 3 shots and then be reloaded, you have a significant advantage. Plus you're on horseback. And at the time, these first Rangers, they would dismount to fire. Like firing on horseback would have been unheard of. But that's what the Comanches were doing, was
with arrows,
doing it with arrows, firing on horseback. And so by the time you dismount, these people are riding up on you, and you don't stand a chance. So they had a hard time like settling that land just because of that. And so back east, there's a guy by the name of Samuel Colt who developed the first revolver, I guess you'd call it. And they had some that were like multiple barrels that would shoot, but his was the first that had a chamber that would revolve around and lock in place, to where you could shoot 5 shots, I think, in the first one. But no one really saw a use for it at the time, except for some Navy guy in Texas ordered like a couple barrels or a couple packages of them or whatever. And somehow they got in the hands of this guy named Jack Hayes, who was a Texas Ranger at the time, who was hired on to do the same sort of stuff, like protecting the surveyors, because Stephen Austin's group, they'd had some success. So then more people are starting to come in too. And then this is around the same time that Texas declared independence. And so then when that happened, that kind of opens the floodgates for people to come in. And the more people there are, the more people they need to protect. And so anyways, he gets his hands on these repeating, and it changes the game entirely, because now you might have 5 shots in one hand and 5 shots in another hand, and then you still have your Kentucky long rifle if you need it. And so that changes the math, where now they can shoot just as quick with firearms as the Indians could with bow and arrow. And so the first time they used those was in a battle at Battle of Walker's Creek, and these Comanches ride in, and they're used to they're gonna dismount, shoot, and then reload, and they just slaughtered them. And there was like 4 or 5 to 1 Comanche per 2 Ranger, and they just slaughtered them, and they had to retreat and everything. And I think the Rangers lost like 1 or 2 guys, but one of the guys who got wounded, his name was Samuel Walker, and I don't know if you've heard of the Colt Walker, but he was probably the second most famous Ranger, maybe behind Jack Hayes, and he went up and helped Samuel Colt develop the first 6-shooter, which is what you see if you watch a Western. They have those 6-shooters, and when he brought on Samuel Walker, it was kind of his last gasp at something, but he thought he had a good idea on his hands, and just no one quite saw the benefit of it, except for this specific group of people who was having this pushback from these people who could shoot 3 arrows in a second and a half.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case for most people. It's just this very specific place. I don't know. The whole thing to me is crazy that they were dismounting, and like how no one had seen the usefulness that might be to be able to fire off of a horse's back.
Yeah.
And some people were trying to make, like, it was an effort to make a repeating rifle or a repeating firearm. People were trying, and Samuel Colt said, "I'm going to try to do the impossible." And so, people are aware of the difficulties of it. But the common remedy that people would have been the idea to put multiple barrels on something. And so then you can load your, but that's not that practical. You have 5. You can only almost do that twice unless you have the same. But his idea was the idea of the chamber where the bullet goes, if that rotates around on a single barrel.
So he didn't like invent it with this in mind. He just had been working on it.
He was working on,
no one really wanted it except when these people heard about it. It's
and
that's perfect.
It wasn't.
The Rangers.
No. It wasn't even that. It wasn't that they heard about it. It was just this. It was some guy who had nothing to do with the Rangers ordered a barrel of the guns. He maybe thought it was a cool gun and wanted to see it or whatever. And somehow the guns ended up in the hand of the Rangers. It wasn't as if they heard about this development and thought we need a ton of them. It just kind of happenstance that they got their hands on these guns, and then it clicks like, okay, we might be onto something here. But yeah, there you go. That's how the West was won right there, as they say.